All right. So, Rise, want to introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll allow Danny to. I know you're a regular, Rise, but there are people that are.
Introduce myself. I'm Jonathan. God bless you guys. My ministry is called Rise Ministry, and that's it. I
Yeah.
feel like
You
I've been here plenty of times. Introduction like 9 months in is kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, hey, look, listen, man. You just never know. All right, Danny. Introduction.
I'm Danny. I enjoy philosophical discussions. I'm actually a fan of Christianity in terms, like I have a lot of Christian friends. My best friend here is a pastor. So I'm far away from being what some might call an anti-theist. So I think that religion has benefited a lot of people. And I don't have a problem with it. I think that I have philosophical concerns, and that's why I'm here. I don't think that being religious predicts that irrationality or lack of intelligence. I think some of the field that I work in, I'm a graduate student. A lot of the philosophers that I read are theist, Catholic or Protestant, and they've benefited me a lot in my learning process. So I'm just here on the basis of this particular philosophical concern. I'm only an atheist with respect to certain conceptions of God. So, for instance, if you believe in a God that can fail, that's not omnipotent, that's not omniscient, then at that point, I'm going to be agnostic to that God. I really don't know about that kind of God. But in terms of I guess I'll call it the God of philosophy or the God of Christian apologetics, I do have very strong philosophical concerns about that kind of conception of God. So,
all right. So, can we start off with some of your concerns, and we could just start off our conversation with that.
Yeah. So, I guess we talked about it last time. This is not the first time I'm talking to
No,
you.
well, most people weren't there, so let's just start.
Right. I'm just saying that in our last conversation, I did bring up the most serious concern is the evil. So the topic of today's discussion has to do with God's failure, but I think they're intertwined. I think that that they might be different issues. Some people think that God is not infallible, but he's still omnipotent, and that's a conversation to be had. But I think first and foremost, the problem of evil seems quite a convincing argument to me. Then there are other concerns. There's questions about, I guess, let's say if there is a God, what makes it reasonable to think that Christianity is a sort of God that Christianity is tracking the sort of God that exists versus not Christianity. And so I think I don't really have any very strong views about that, but I almost lost sight of the question, so sorry.
All right, Rise, care to respond?
There's nothing to respond to yet. You're just when we have.
Look, I thought you would say you had a couple of friends that were in that situation, but all right, since we're done with small talk here, I guess and people are getting in here. We have 83 people in here already. I guess we can start getting into the deep issues now. So, Danny, if you don't mind, can you begin with an argument, and I'll respond or Rise will respond. I already know the argument, but for the sake of the people that weren't in that previous debate or discussion we had, let's just start fresh.
Yeah, and I want to add to what you just said there. I know we have an audience, so if I'm not being clear, like either I'm using a term that everyone in the room knows, but your audience probably doesn't know, I would want to clear that up, because I think I want the audience to be a part of it in the sense that I want them to understand what I'm saying, even if they disagree. So,
we'll open up the panel at the end as well, so people can join in and question you or us.
All right. So I'm just going to give this a kind of standard problem of evil. Here's the standard problem of evil. Something like, if God knows about everything that happens, all events, right? And if God somehow makes it such that an event can happen, in other words, if something happened, or if God doesn't exist, then nothing can happen, right? All events depend on God's actualization or God's intentions, God's desires. If there were no God, there'd be no events. And if God is all good, meaning that if he actualizes an event, and that's a fancy term to mean like make some state of affair or some sentence true about the world.
Would you say predestined? If God predestined certain things, would you say that?
No, I wouldn't say that, because that I mean, predestination has different meanings depending on the kind of Christian that you are. Calvinists have a different a sense of predestination. The non-Calvinists have a different sense of predestination.
Correct.
So,
So
like,
what do you mean by God makes certain things happen? Like, can you clarify that?
yeah, that so the idea there is kind of what I said earlier, that if there were no God, there would be no events. Nothing in terms of creative events would happen. So there's got to be some sense of connection between what is or what has happened and what will happen, and God's intention. And
Okay.
so on the Calvinist perspective, that's directly causal. So on Calvinism, we're only here because God caused us to be here. But on non-Calvinism, I'm just going to take. There's a fancy position called Molinism. Molinism is the view that God doesn't cause free creatures, like agents that have free will, to do anything, but rather He sets it up such that we do certain things with our free will. So the Molinist would say that God set up the situation to where we're having this conversation, but He didn't cause us to have.
Yeah, I'm not a Molinist, but I do agree with Molinists more than Calvinism. I was actually studying Molinism. I'm not a Molinist, but that doesn't matter. Continue on, and
Yeah. And then you do have people that think that there's a kind of like a dice roll, right? God didn't know what was going to happen when He sort of pushed the creation button, right? When He started the universe, He didn't know He knew what color Pluto would be and how many planets there would be. But in terms of creatures and their free actions, He didn't know what was going to happen there, and He was just hoping for the best outcome. Okay, so that's maybe some people might call that open theism, but there's not really a sense of predestination. So if I'm talking, did you?
No. I was agreeing, yeah, because open theism, I believe that's heresy. But continue on.
But yeah, I didn't. I just assumed that I wasn't talking to open theists. A lot of that's an unpopular view amongst Christians. There's like a lot of exegetical biblical verses that seem to like not mesh well with that. God knew that Peter would deny Him 3 times. It seems like He does know about what we would do in the future. But anyways, I guess if you want to go back to the argument, I guess the context of what I was saying was that there's a sense in which what happens, whether God set it up or whether He caused it to happen, depending on whether you're Calvinist or non-Calvinist, right? There's a sense in which the event depends on God's existence. And then if you add the property of omniscience, right, then He knows that connection, right? So for instance, if I throw the dice, right, I know that I'm causing whatever outcome, right? But I don't know exactly that outcome after at the moment in which before I throw it, I don't know the outcome. But the fact is, if you're not an open theist, then when God pressed the creation button, He knew that we would have this conversation. He knew that Joe Biden would be president, et cetera, right? So there's kind of the idea of God's omniscience, and establishes that He knows about all events.
So in short, just so that the audience doesn't get lost. In short, you're saying God knew all of this evil, all of these things was going to happen when He created His creation. He knew it was going to happen.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. And so now, then let's get to the tricky property of God. So I think I established, I might have gone too fast over omnibenevolence, but we got omniscience. We got the idea that in some sense, events depend on God's existence. And then we have omnibenevolence, which is the idea that God would only be responsible for events that should happen, right? And that then we get to the last property, omnipotence, which is the idea that God can make any state of affair, any logical state of affair happen. I guess the way that, I don't know if y'all are familiar with William Lane Craig, but he would say something like, God has all the abilities or the power to make any state of affairs happen, or that's to say, make any proposition true, any logical coherent proposition true. So I guess a proposition in philosophy just means think of a sentence, but that could be true or false, right? Questions are not true or false. If I ask you what time is it, that's not a proposition. But if I tell you it's 7 p.m., that is a proposition because it can be true or false. So God's omnipotence is cashed out in terms of making any logically coherent proposition true. Okay. So then the idea is that then there's events that have happened. So let's just take something that's evil. Maybe we can all agree. I hate to use the Hitler example because that's overused. But
no, go ahead, and try to conclude your argument.
Right. So the idea is that there were events that on Christianity is evil, like the Holocaust, right? And it was logically possible. It's a logically coherent proposition that the Holocaust does not happen, or there were no 8 million people were not murdered at the hands of the Nazis. And so God, having the omnipotence, knowing that it would happen, he could have actualized the state of affairs in which the Holocaust did not happen. But nonetheless, we find ourselves with an evil event.
All right, got it. Okay, Rise, would you care to respond to that?
Go ahead.
All right, I'll respond. So my response to that is this, as I believe that you already heard me argue on the previous, but we'll move forward and eventually we'll get to a part where we didn't argue the last time around. Evil happens because of man's free will. That is my belief. I believe that what happened in Hitler was allowed by God because God does not interfere with humans' decisions. So if somebody's going to stab me or something like that, God will allow it to happen because that is that person's free will. The same way I have free will to prevent that from happening. God didn't offer us a long physical life, but he offered us eternal life. So this physical life is but a vapor, and things happen in this life in which disasters and catastrophes happen because of human error and human decision and human choices and greed and things of that nature. You mentioned earlier that God knew that all of this would happen. And I'm glad that you said I'm not a Calvinist, because I don't believe God ordained all of these things to happen. God simply knew with his foreknowledge what would happen. And because God wants us to be free, he allowed it to happen. And so I wouldn't say that God doesn't exist or God failed in my worldview, because God allows certain activities to happen. You would argue, and not because I know your arguments, but because we already had this similar discussion, but you would argue, well, how come God does intervene in certain specific biblical events? We know that God has intervened in certain events and hasn't intervened in others. And ultimately, God has a purpose and a plan for specific situations in which he does intervene, right? And there are certain situations where he just allows creation to continue on as they want to. I'll finish off by saying this, and either you or Rise can respond. God intervened with all of creation when he came to, the Bible verse, he came onto his own, and his own worshiped the darkness rather than the light, and they rejected him. And so God intervened for all humanity, not just specific instances. He intervened for all of humanity, but humanity rejected him. And so that's my response to that.
Right. Did you want to say anything? You haven't said anything.
No, I'm listening, because there isn't anything where I would say me interjecting at this point would literally change or add on to the conversation. So I'm listening. I will speak. Just go ahead.
So I guess I want to make sure I understand, JP. Do you think that if some agent or subject has free will, that necessarily means they can do evil, or there's the possibility of them doing evil?
If a person is free, they have the ability to do whatever they wish because they are free.
Okay, and that includes and evil events, right?
Correct. All things. So if
Okay.
I am a free creature, I can harm or I can do good.
Okay. So God has free will, but he only does the good. So it seems like you're committed to thinking that God can do evil. So he's not omnibenevolent.
Well, no. I mean, I can see why you have came to the conclusion with my words, but I will clarify further. So God cannot do evil, God simply allows his creation to do whatever it wants because it's truly free. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that because God has created a creation that is free, that can do whatever they want, God is the author of evil, since God, after all, created us totally free. So let me get where you're coming from, Danny, just so that we're not misrepresenting each other. So, Danny, are you saying that because God created humans and humans do evil, God as by default is evil? Is that what you're saying, Danny? If
No,
not,
I'm saying that if whatever logical bar that makes it such that God allows evil, it can't be free will, because God has free will, and free will there doesn't entail the possibility of evil. So it has to be some other reason.
What do you mean by God allows evil? And then just curious.
Well, let's take Joseph in the Exodus. I think it's in the Exodus account, if not late Genesis. He used the brothers' jealousy and toxicity, right, to bring about the state of affairs in which Joseph ascended to the hierarchy and leadership in Egypt to save these people from famine. So there, I think, is a classic example of using evil or allowing evil for a greater good. Now, I think there might be some peripheral auxiliary issues with that, but I'm willing to overlook those. The point is that many Christians are going to say, in that case, God used evil or allowed for evil for some greater aim.
I mean, my disagreement there is that God works in spite of human evil. So God's plans, because as we spoke about before, foreknowledge, his plans will work despite whatever human evil may befall on somebody else. So whenever we're talking about a human and their free will, 100% the human has free will, but through God's foreknowledge, he has made plans that are already account for whatever decisions that we will decide to make ultimately. So it's necessary. God's plan specifically with Joseph, he already knew Joseph's brothers would betray him, and because he knew Joseph's brothers would betray him, there's a plan that he made where Joseph still becomes second in command. But if Joseph's brothers chose not to betray him, God would have known that anyway, that Joseph's brothers would not have betrayed him, and he would have made a plan regardless. He would have made a plan regardless for Joseph to reach his destination. So Joseph's destination didn't matter what Joseph's destination. It didn't matter how Joseph got to his destination. God put the plan in place for Joseph to reach that destination, regardless of what evil was happening was happening because of human free will.
Yeah, I think that I'm a little puzzled by that, because I guess let me use an analogy and then we'll reflect it back on Joseph's story. I got a vaccine. I hate needles. Okay, I don't like getting stabbed with a needle.
Bro, don't say laxine.
I'm sorry.
You can get the channel, like YouTube is taking channels down if they talk and they say those words, laxine, Lovid.
Okay. I'll be sensitive to that.
Just be careful. Yeah, go ahead. Continue on.
I have to get shots for whatever, right? Get blood work done, and I have to get pricked with the needle. I don't like that. I think I think the idea there is that my belief that it should happen is because there's a limitation on my part to get whatever treatment I need or whether blood work I need without getting pricked. Okay. And so the idea is that if I can choose between two scenarios, let's say the scenario in which I receive my treatment, both scenarios I receive my treatment, but one is without any pain and the one is with pain, I'm going to choose the method in which I can receive treatment without pain, right? And here, the analogy, pain is tracking with evil. I don't take them to be synonymous, but just for analogy's sake. So if we're taking Joseph's story, okay, both scenarios, let's say that there's a world in which Joseph got second in command, the same world Joseph got second in command, but one of which his brothers supported Joseph in a way where he got second in command, and the other which it happened in the biblical story where it was actually quite the opposite, that they were jealous and they actually betrayed Joseph. Right now, if the idea is that if we're calling that evil, what that means is that is fundamentally undesirable to God. So if God had the power, right, to actualize a world in which he accomplishes his aim in terms of Joseph's leadership without them committing sin, some kind of sin, right? Then he would actualize that world, right? But he doesn't. And so now there has to be a logical barrier as to why he didn't, but I don't see
So
any.
let me make this short, Danny. Okay, go ahead. Raz, let me just.
Go ahead. You had your point.
No. I'm gonna explain this for the audience just very clearly, and you can respond.
Oh.
So, Danny, long story short, because I like making long story short, is saying that God has the power to make things happen without there being evil, and He doesn't do it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, Raz, go ahead. You can respond now.
So what I would say is that God did create a world or a situation where there was no sin, and the plan was literally for humanity not to sin, and humanity chose to actually impart sin into their life. So when we're talking about God creating a plan, yes, God will wish for all of us to reach our goal without failing. The truth of the matter is that as human beings, we have a propensity to do evil or to do bad or to not do good. Actually, Bible Jesus was very clear and very specific when he said, "Why do you call me good? You can only call God good." So if the people were calling Jesus good in that situation, they were saying that he was God. You see, in Jewish belief, in Jewish belief during that time, nobody could say good because good is subjective, and the only thing that could be viewed as good is God. So humanity, I believe, left to its own devices completely, would destroy itself. And we don't have to look far into the world history to know that humanity, left to its own devices, would destroy itself multiple times over. A lot of we have so God makes a plan in spite of human evil, because humanity, left to its own devices, will generally choose to do what is evil. Look, for you, we all live in the United States here. Our entire economic system is based off greed. Our entire economic system rewards greed. If you get, the more greed you have, the better it is for the overall economy. We reward people to make more and more and more money. So we created a system even based off the ideas of human evil, because we generally, a human being, specifically a human being that is not led by God, will always choose to follow their own desires and what they want best for themselves.
Do you want to say something, JP, or can I respond?
No, so we have 180 viewers so far altogether. So I just wanted to say, if you guys missed the beginning of this debate, eventually I will open up the panel so you guys can question Danny yourselves. That's all I wanted to say for all the people coming in. And Danny, I would just say that as far as God interjecting, and for example, basically you're saying, why doesn't God create a world where things happen where there's no evil? I believe that is a violation of our free will, right? If every and let me explain, if every single time an evil was going to happen, God smacks his fingers and says, wait a minute, I'm going to adjust this so that this doesn't happen, somebody is getting their free will violated. Whether I may look at it and be like, wow, I almost got shot in the head, but the Lord snapped his fingers, and then the person didn't shoot me because now the Lord snapped his fingers, and the guy's working at a McDonald's now, and he's trying to get his life together, right? But the person didn't want to work at McDonald's and get his life together. The person wanted to shoot me in the head. All I am simply saying is, every single time God interjects, right? Because you mentioned, I don't forgot what the term's name is. The guys in the middle knowledge. Molinist, yes.
Molinism.
Yeah, I'm not so much into Molinism, but I will say this, right? I understand the perspective in multiple scenarios, and God allows certain things to happen, and etc. But for me, I reject that idea, because I'm simply saying we're all here. God knows what's going to happen in his foreknowledge, but he doesn't always interject for the sake of our free will.
Well, the Molinists are going to agree with you, right? There's like two senses of Molinism. There's mere
Molinists say that God knows every specific possibility and he puts you in the best one.
Well, that's our in terms of the latter part, like best there. Yes, the idea is that.
So I don't believe God. I don't believe that God, takes every single situation and puts us in the best one. Because again, God didn't promise us a long, physical, prosperous life. Prosperity gospel people say that the Lord wants you to have $1 million and a mansion and the best life and the best health. God didn't promise us that.
Well, let me clarify Molinism. There's two senses of Molinism. There's mere Molinism, and then there's like full-blown Molinism. Just like Molinism. There's a distinction between being a mere Molinist and a Molinist is what I'm trying to say. A mere Molinist thinks that God knows all true hypotheticals in which you would act with your free will, and that and they also accept libertarian free will, which is a specific philosophical type of free will. But the mere Molinist thinks that God, when he creates, he doesn't create using his knowledge of all hypotheticals in which you would do something with your free will. But the full-blown Molinist is going to say that no, God does use that knowledge, right? So let's use the Joseph example. God knew that in this particular circumstance, that Joseph's brothers would throw him in a hole and sell him to slavery, right? And because he knew that, he made it happen, right? That's what the Molinist is going to say.
Yeah.
So
now, and I disagree with that because
okay,
I don't believe God made that happen. I believe God allowed it to happen, and God allows society to run its course.
Wait, let's clarify. When you said made that happen, the point is that without God, that would have not happened, right?
Well, of course, but then if we're going to play that game, then we could say that, all of existence would, you know what I'm saying?
That's the view.
But let me be very clear. Rise, I'll let you finish. Let me just be very clear with my statement. What I mean by God didn't make that happen, I mean God didn't predestine that to happen.
In the Calvinist sense.
Yeah, God simply allowed it to happen.
Yeah, the Molinist agrees.
But he allowed it to happen.
Yeah, the Molinist is going to agree. Look, the Molinist is you're arguing from a Molinist position. They don't want to say that God predestined in a causal sense. Because remember, in our last conversation,
yeah, but Danny, I believe that you said that God made that happen, correct, Danny?
Right, but they mean something different than cause.
So what do you mean? Let me be very clear here, so I don't misrepresent you. What do you mean God made that happen?
So in the literature,
what role did God have with that of Joseph?
Okay, in the literature they call it weak actualization, and the Molinists might use the word influence, right? So the idea is that when God sees the possibility in which Joseph's brothers threw him in a hole, right? There's nothing he's responsible for that if that were to happen, right? In the sense that, in terms of the free actions of each.
Well, Calvinism they say the same thing because of compatibilism, and they say, you know what compatibilism is.
Yeah, I'm a compatibilist, but maybe this might illustrate.
So you're a compatibilist.
Yes, I'm a compatibilist.
You believe that God ordained all things and we're still responsible.
Oh no, I don't. I'm an atheist, but I'm a compatibilist outside of this debate, right? In the sense that I'm fine with assuming libertarian free will because presumably that's your sense of free will, maybe not. But what I'm trying to say is, in terms of explaining Molinism, perhaps this might help.
Yeah, I just want an explanation, and then I'll let Rai speak, and I'm done. Just give me an explanation from your point of view, so I don't misrepresent you going forward. What do you mean God made that situation happen? Because I want to understand. What do you mean God made that happen? Essentially, what I heard you say, and then you'll get to speak, and I won't cut you off.
Right. I'm borrowing from what they mean by it because
Okay, so Danny, what do you take off of that situation, Danny? Joseph got beat up, thrown in a hole, sold, and then he becomes king. What is your issue with that?
What's my issue with that?
Yeah, what is your position?
All my issue is this: if Christianity thinks that what happened there was evil, then God had a reason not to let it happen.
Okay, got it. Rise, care to respond to that?
And again, as I've mentioned before, God works in spite of human evil because humans have its propensity to do evil. And
I do remember what you said. Do you want to finish your thought, or do you want to?
No, that's all I wanted to say because I think the one thing that we don't agree with this, but God does intervene into human things, into human events when it suits his purpose.
Sure,
And
I'm
he
not going
does.
to dispute that.
Yeah.
What I'm going to dispute is this: that this notion of having the propensity or tendency to do evil, it seems like that's not necessary to human beings, or really, I should say, agents or subjects. Right? It seems like God could have created us in a way where we have a propensity to always do the good. Because,
He did.
okay, did you want to say
He
something?
did. I mean, he did. I mean, if you go back to the Garden of Eden, he created us with without a sinful nature.
Well, let me clarify. At every moment, right? I think that it's logically possible for God to make it such that everyone at every moment, including after the garden, right, to have a propensity to always do the good. I don't see a contradiction there, given that God has free will and he always does the good. Or maybe another way to understand it is that in heaven, people have free will, but they always do the good. At least after. So either one, I prefer the God example because some people.
You said in heaven people have free will and always do the good, because that's not a case at all as well. Even the angels had a choice in to serve God or not serve
Well,
God.
then that's fine. Let's just stick with the. If you don't, some people. That's why I wanted to say that some people's conception of heaven is that it's possible that you could sin in heaven after you die. If that's your view, sure. What I'm trying to say is
that's not what I'm trying to say. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so do you think that in heaven? Do you think that in heaven, when you're going to be able to sin?
I don't think that. I think that our sinful nature, because remember, Danny, we will have a new body when we get to heaven, so that will mean that our sinful nature will come to an end. The bodies that we have now we have a propensity to do sin. We all have things that especially even Christians will be the first one to admit it, that we struggle with, because we all are given this. We all have a sinful nature inherited from the original sin of the choosing of not obeying God in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, so I think that actually shows my point, because then you believe, right, that once you get to heaven, after you get your new body and such, you will have the propensity to always do the good forever, for the rest of eternity, until in the infinite future, right? And so
yes, because you will no longer be bound by sinful.
Right. So then the question, that's all that is. That example is
So
to
Danny,
show.
and Danny, you'll get to finish real quick, Danny. Let me interject. We will no longer have a sinful nature in heaven because we chose that path here on earth. Jesus said that no one comes to the Father if it's not through me. And once we get over there, we'll have glorified bodies. But we chose that with our free will here. And so as a result, when we're in heaven, we'll no longer have that ability to sin. That is what I chose here. You see?
Right. So what I'm trying to say with the God example and the heaven example, God has free will. He always does the good. You will have free will, and you'll have a new body, and you will always do the good for infinite future, to the infinite future. And what that shows is that there's no contradiction in saying that there's a world in which, at every moment, you have the sort of will in which is oriented to the good. In every case, that in every way of and anytime you make a choice, right? If there's no contradiction there, then that means God can make that world happen, but he didn't, right?
Well, again, for God to create a world where after sin were to arrive, for God to make a world like that, he would have to essentially destroy the world that he had created already.
No. I mean, look, wait. I don't mean to interrupt, but there's a clarification. When I'm using the word world, I mean it in the kind of the philosophical, logical sense, meaning like in this hypothetical world that's not the actual world. The actual world, there was sin, right? But in this other crazy hypothetical, right next to the Star Wars universe, right?
Yeah.
There's this world in which there was no sin, and every moment we had a kind of nature in which was always oriented to choosing the good. And I don't see how, in other words, there's a contradiction between always doing the good at every moment and having free will. In other words, the free will theodicy, right? The free will theodicy is what some Christian philosophers offer as a solution to evil. So like the free, you can think of it as a theological excuse, right? But the free will theodicy does not work, because free will is compatible with always doing the good and never doing evil.
Why do you say free will is compatible always doing the good and never choosing
because
evil?
God has it, right? God has free will and he always does the good. He can't do evil.
God cannot do evil.
Right, but and he has free will, so there's no contradiction in saying I have free will and I can't do evil. So that means that free will can't be used.
Say that last part one more time.
Yeah, there's no logical contradiction between I have free will and I can't do evil. Right?
And I can't do evil.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that you have the free will and you will always choose good.
Right. Because what I'm trying to say is that free will doesn't mean that there's this possibility.
Let me make a long story short again, Danny. Let me help you out here.
Mm-hmm.
So what Danny is saying is God has free will and he does not do evil. Therefore, God could have made us free creatures without
No. Therefore, free will is not going to be a good theodicy, because free will, it doesn't mean or entail that you could choose sin or evil, right? So it can't be used as an explanation for evil.
So what you're saying is that free will cannot be used as an excuse for evil because what? What is it again?
Because if free will, I can hear myself, sorry. If free will means that you can do evil, that you can't believe that, because then God has free will, and that doesn't mean that he can do evil.
But again, you're kind of downplaying the fact that we have a sinful nature while God does not.
But you see, earlier I said that it seems like it's logically possible, once again, for God to make us with a sort of nature that is oriented to always doing the good. I don't see a logical contradiction.
And he did when he created Adam and Eve.
No, in every moment.
But Danny, that's what I was telling you before, that if God were to do that, he would have to restart humanity.
No, I'm not talking about the actual world. I'm talking about a possible world. Look, let me give you this example.
Talking about there's a possible world out there. You're talking about there's a possible world out there, hypothetical world. You're talking about a different universe where God created, and they didn't choose. They chose to obey God, and because they choose to obey God, sin was never introduced into the world.
Right? Maybe. Look, let me give you the Molinist position. I know JP is not a Molinist, so this is not JP's position, but this is the way they see it. Right? The idea is this: before creation, God, quote unquote, sees all the worlds that he can bring about. He sees a world in which you're a lawyer. He sees a world in which you're a doctor. He sees a world in which you're a preacher. He sees a world in which we have a conversation.
But I think Danny, and not sorry to cut you off, because I'm gonna be basing it off this, because I think once we start going off the hypothetical of there being multiple universes, multiple worlds, and multiple possibilities out there, we're going very far off script. I want to really focus.
No, but that is the logical problem of evil is all about the possibility, because it's like this, right? Listen,
Dan. The reason why I'm saying that is that we have to also remember that because of God's foreknowledge, God knew that humanity was going to fail even when he decided to create us in the first place. So even though, yes, maybe hypothetically, if this is what you're trying to say, Adam and Eve would not choose the fruit. They were going to choose the fruit because God knew that was going to be our selection. That's what we decided to do.
But you see, it's not necessary. Look here, I guess. Let me finish with my explanation for how some Christians might see how God works in terms of sans creation, before creation. Okay, so the idea is that God sees all these possibilities, right? And he sees a possibility in which go ahead, JP.
No, I wanted to ask you a question before you continue. Do you rule out the possibility that God simply wanted us to have a decision between good and evil? Because there is a Christian worldview, and I hold to this view, where God gave us the option to do good or evil because God wanted to see if we truly loved them. And this is a foreshadow of Adam and Eve, because Adam and Eve, although they had the world, right? They had the world, they chose to do evil. So there was paradise, essentially, and then there was evil, and they chose to do evil. So I couldn't say God is immoral for giving us the option to do good or to do evil, despite God not having that option, because he's God and he's the one that said, I want man to have the option to serve me because they love me, or they choose to do evil. And I mentioned this before, Danny, and this might actually trigger our next conversation. That That's why Jesus died for his creation, right? He died for his creation, and he valued the way that he made the world, so much so that he gave his life for us, so, and that kind of, I remember the last time around, you asked me a question about did God fail? Maybe you can repeat that question a little later. But go ahead,
Yeah,
Dan.
we can go down
Okay,
that
guys,
path.
let me just finish my last sentence. This is my last sentence. Danny, do you rule out the possibility that God can still be good while giving his creatures an option to do good or evil? Because that's the way God did it. That's my final question.
Yeah, so
Danny, y'all can go ahead.
I think that so let me make sure I understand you. You're saying that why wouldn't God allow for a moral dilemma? In other words, right? There's a moral dilemma in which you're choosing between the right and the good and evil, right? There's no moral dilemma when you go and choose your cereals, right? Like you might love Lucky Charms, and Lucky Charms is there. You have all these other options, right? But there's no moral dilemma. There's not like a wrong, immoral choice. If you had chosen Honey Nut Cheerios, that would have been equally as good. So you're saying that is there any value in God's mind to create moral dilemmas for us to show that we indeed love him and are kind of on his side, right? And I think that I'm going to disagree, because I think that you don't need the possibility of doing something immoral to show
Danny, just so you don't misrepresent me, just so we're clear, Danny, I'm not to interrupt. All I am saying is this is how God chose to do it.
Yeah.
And
I would also
go ahead,
going based off what your discussion is, God made the choice seem very, in hindsight, like if you read the text, God made the choice be very easy for Adam and Eve. For the most part, because if you think about it, he didn't restrict them from anything. So going off of your discussion, he didn't make the reason why it's a morality issue, why it became a morality issue, is because God is perfect. Any sin actually would separate you from God. And the sin that Adam and Eve have by choosing the fruit is disobedience. So regardless of if God telling them specific instructions and they choosing against those specific instructions, God gives them the free will because he loves us, to say, you know what, I want you to love me for me. In the same way, like if I want somebody to love me, I'm not gonna force them to show me love. I want them to showcase their love by doing different things for me. In God's case, we're talking about a God that has everything. The only thing he wanted from his creation was obedience, and for them to choose obedience. So when humanity fails that decision, ultimately God has two choices. This is what I was trying to talk to you about. God can choose to destroy his creation completely because there is now sin in the creation, or he can choose to have a plan in place so that he can go and redeem his creation, which he loves. So God chooses, instead of destruction of sin, because Danny, the big thing about sin, even if it was for your hypothetical, God says, do not choose Lucky Charms. And we said, I want to choose Lucky Charms, even though God told us, is that sin means missing the mark. And when we're comparing yourself to a perfect God, if you were to miss the mark in any way, it means separation. And that's why the Bible makes it very clear that the wages of sin is death. It's not, oh, how much did I sin? It's not if necessarily this is bad or this is good. It's if I'm disobedient to God. And that's what Adam and Eve chose to do. And because of Adam and Eve's decision, what they do is that it made us sinful. We all inherited their sinful nature. That's something that at birth, you had a sinful nature, meaning that at birth, because of the decisions of what happened with humanity, you already have a propensity towards sin. You already have a propensity towards rejecting God. Originally, you were created, Adam and Eve were created with the propensity towards acknowledging and loving God. Once we got this sinful nature, it shows up in different ways. For some people, they choose what their thing is. They reject God and they reject God's offer. For other people, it shows up in more obvious ways, whether it's addiction, whether it's whether it's something that the world may view as disgraceful, but everybody, because of sin and that separation, is slated to be apart from God. And God says, you know what? I'm going to throw a lifeline to my creation so that my creation can actually choose me once again. He's given us another opportunity to choose him. So that same opportunity that Adam and Eve rejected by not obeying him, Jesus says, you know what? With my death, I'm giving you that same opportunity, Daddy, to actually accept me today.
So I want to respond to each of y'all. Okay. JP.
And Danny, I'm not going to interrupt you, all right? Danny, if I do interrupt you, it's to clarify my stance, okay? But I'm going to be quiet. You can go ahead. Floor's yours.
It's fine. So I want to respond to both of y'all, and I don't mind being interrupted if please interrupt me if I'm misrepresenting your position, because I don't want to attack a misrepresentation. Mm-hmm. So JP, you might have retracted the statement, but initially what I heard was something like, why wouldn't God create a moral dilemma in which we have to choose between him and not him, in an effort to show that we actually are committed to loving him and following him, right? And I'm saying what I wanted to respond to that, the way I want to respond to that, is that you can show that you're committed to someone without the possibility of there being an immoral, without the possibility of an immoral choice.
May I interject? If you give me permission. If not,
of course, yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, and you can continue on. All I am saying is, you are correct, Danny. Perhaps that can be the case, but God chose to do the world that way that he made it. So perhaps God could have, right? And we could take the Rise approach, and God can say, okay, you know what? I'm going to destroy all of y'all and create a new world in which, or a new universe or a new potential, whatever it is that you believe, Danny. I'm going to create a new that and create a creation that is perfect in every way. And they don't have the opportunity to do evil or whatever. But for whatever reason, God made it this way, and this is what we have. We have evil and we have good. And we have God who entered his own creation to save us from that evil. Go ahead, Danny. That is my stance.
Yeah, so yeah, that means that it's a good response. It sounds like a view in philosophy called skeptical theism, which is the idea that, look, there are moral dilemmas all over the place. There's things that are seemingly evil, but the fact is that God has some greater purpose for all of these dilemmas, for all of these, all this seemingly evil, seemingly immoral events. But the point is that he did it for some reason. We might not know it. Doesn't matter. That's the view called skeptical theism. And that's a whole.
I know the reason why he did it. Whether you reject that reason or not, that's another conversation. But
wait, so you think that but you don't surely you don't know the reason why he?
No, I do.
Why did he allow the Holocaust?
Because God created us to be co-heirs with him. God created us for fellowship, and God wanted to know that we truly loved him with the opportunity.
But it seems like he can do all of that without the Holocaust, right? There's no.
Well, remember, that goes back to what I said originally, where God allowed it to happen because God allows people to do whatever they want because there is freedom.
But the free will is not going to.
Danny, do you want to continue, or do you want me to keep interjecting? Because I don't want to interrupt.
Well, let me. Rise spent a lot of time. How about this? Rise spent a lot of time. I just wanted to say all I wanted to say, and maybe I'm
gonna stay quiet unless you tell me the answer.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, all I wanted to say is that it seems like God can demonstrate that we love him without the possibility of evil, and that's a conversation that we can have. But I wanted to quickly respond to Rise. Rise was talking about this sinful nature, this propensity to do evil, and I guess very simply, Rise, I just don't think. I think it's logically possible for God to have made a world in which that propensity to do evil never comes into fruition. That's to say that in every moment, humans have the propensity to do the good. I don't see a logical contradiction. I understand that you take the position that in this world, we do have the propensity to do evil, but I'm saying that's just not necessary. It seems like God is powerful enough to make a world in which that propensity never occurred within us. And I know that's a short response to your long, your thoughts that you had given, but I hope that I kind of.
Well, I'm a Thomas Hobbes man myself, so I believe that humanity is evil. Like that's what
But that's
I
not
believe.
necessary.
Evil by nature. Evil by
Yes.
Yeah,
nature.
but why is that? That's not logically necessary, right? That's just because remember, the way I understand omnipotence is that all it means for sages to say that God is all powerful is that he can make any logically coherent sentence come true. I think it's logically coherent to say that all humans at every moment have a propensity to do the good, and that's to say the no ability to do evil. That is logically coherent to me. So God has that ability to make that happen.
He does, but at what point does that interfere with human free will?
It doesn't, because free will is compatible with always doing the good, given that God has free will.
Well, you have to understand, like when we're talking about God versus humanity, God is gets put through situations that humanity is put through situations that God never needs to have. So we can't make the same argument, right? Because, for example, God has no need to lie, right? And this is even I don't. The Bible says that God is not man, so for him to be a liar. But if you even think about this from a philosophical point of view, if I am the Almighty, there's no need for me to actually lie to anybody, because the lying, because the fact of the matter is that oftentimes we lie because we have to hide something. We're lying because of deceit. We're lying because we feel it's necessary to deceive someone else. Usually lying is seen in a position of power, in a line of position of power. The person that's oftentimes lying is lying to the person with the power. God is the person with the power, so there's no necessity for him to lie to his own creation.
Yeah, I agree
right?
with that. I don't have a problem with that.
So going back to what you're saying, humanity is in different situations where for example, God would never actually have to be in. When we're talking about when he's creating things, there's never a necessity for God to lie. Is my biggest situation.
But what I'm pointing out is that God can create the circumstances in which it's never necessary for me to lie. He's powerful enough to do that.
And again, everything that you mentioned, so like, for example, the Holocaust, that's all human nature. Now, what I would
it's
say
not necessary, right?
And no, this is what I would say. God has God still interjects into human nature, but he doesn't interfere he doesn't interfere completely. And the reason why I say that is because at the end of the day, if you know anything about World War II, since we're talking about the Holocaust, it can be a lot. Some of the if God doesn't interject, one can argue that the Allied soldiers get destroyed. If the Allied soldiers get destroyed, then there is nobody to stop nobody's to stop Hitler's attempt to take over the world. Why do I say that? Well, if we look at Dunkirk, right, in 1940, the English soldiers are cornered. America hasn't entered the war yet. America's staying neutral. We know that. They don't come into 1941. 1940, the English soldiers are cornered on the English Strait. And what happens? They need to get a retreat. The German soldiers have an overwhelming force. If the German soldiers destroy the English forces in Dunkirk, the war is over. We're talking about 1940. The Blitzkrieg secede. The war is over. Hitler has a free reign to take over the rest of the free world. What happens at Dunkirk? I'll tell you what happens at Dunkirk. A massive fog comes in, rolls in, which allows the British soldiers to retreat back to England. Now, you could attribute that massive fog that allows the rest of the English troops to survive, to retreat back to England, to coincidence. I do not view it as coincidence. I view it as God deciding, or God putting his influence into the actual events of the world. Because as we know, we have agents. God is an agent upon himself. So God is going to do specific things working around human
I think you're
nature.
missing the point on the Holocaust point, right? All I mean by the reason why I brought the Holocaust with respect to what you said is that suppose God used the Holocaust to accomplish some aim, let's call that A. Okay, it seems like if God is powerful enough that He could have used anything to accomplish A. So let's say He might have used
Again, Danny, I'm sorry, but the reason why I cut your Holocaust point, because what you're trying to say, that's why I said, at what point does God continue to interfere into human nature? Because if we do that, then we don't have to just stop at the Holocaust, right?
right, absolutely.
We can be like, why didn't God stop the rape of Nanking?
Yeah,
right?
that's my question here, right? That's the problem of
And I
evil.
get your question, but you have to understand, all of this is done. Again, what is the agent moving, deciding all of this? It is human, perverted, destructive nature. So,
but I already said this. None of that is necessary. God could have created us to where we don't have that destructive or sinful nature.
And again, as I've mentioned before, once we received a sinful nature, the only
you're missing my argument. What do you think my argument is?
I'm not missing your argument.
Because what do you think my argument? Can you just phrase my argument the way that you see it?
The way I'm framing your argument is that God could have created us in a specific way where we can choose to
always do the good. And with respect to before we attained a sinful nature, God could have change the circumstances in which that would have never happened. I think He's powerful enough for that.
At what point do you take away? Because what is free will to you? What is your definition of free will?
Well, it's something like not being governed by laws of nature, being the cause of your behaviors.
Exactly. So being the cause of your behaviors, God allowed and gave man to his own behavior, to his own desires. That's what man does. Man desires certain things. At the root cause of it, man oftentimes, well, outside of maybe you could say the Holocaust, at the end of the day, man's desire is to please its flesh, or to basically please numero uno, self-preservation. Why do you, even if you go back even to animals, right? Even except you could argue that mankind and animals are distinctly different, and we are, but that's what animals do. Animals' number one mindset is, how do I please myself? How do I go and do the things that I want to do to make myself happy? Animal nature shows that let everything be. I don't want to use the word damn, but it doesn't matter what happens. Like, I don't care if that animal dies. I don't have sympathy for that animal. I don't even have care if one bear is intruding on another bear and they're both trying to mate for the same female. All hell breaks loose between those two male bears because they're both fighting for the same female. So we see that in our entire nature, our entire world nature is to think for ourselves, and that's what God, and that's what you're arguing against. For humanity to take away, for God to change the nature that humanity elected. Because when Adam and Eve chose to disobey God, they're choosing themselves.
Yeah, but I'm saying God could have changed the conditions in which they chose him.
How would he have changed the conditions?
That's not for me to know. That's like asking, how did God create the universe? It doesn't matter. The point is that it's logically possible, and so that means that God can do it.
No, again, he could, and the way that he could have done it was by deciding to destroy humanity. That's how he could have done it and restarting.
No. I'm just saying that if the moment before Eve made the choice to disobey God, God could have done something such that it influenced Eve not to eat of the tree and be deceived.
So at that point, is that free will? If God is influencing Eve not to eat of the tree?
Yeah, no, the free will's still there. There's no contradiction there, right? But look, I can influence you to do sorts of things, right? If I start yelling at you, you're probably going to be confused, right? I can influence you in all sorts of ways. You can do the same to me, right? The point is that God has a greater command of reality in a way where he knows the exact conditions that would have influenced the situation to where Eve would have chosen the good thing rather than the bad thing.
I think the problem there is that we're trying to tell God how he should have done certain specific
No,
things.
I'm not even. Look, I don't want to be making that argument. I'm saying this is by God's perspective, right? Look, from God's perspective, it's undesirable to him that Eve disobeys him, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that means that he has a reason to not let that happen.
But again, what you're saying is that God should have stopped Eve.
No, I'm not. I'm not. That's not coming from my perspective. This is an internal critique. You're on Christianity. Forget about my views. On Christianity, God is himself telling himself that this is an undesirable state of affairs in which Eve ate from the tree.
Yes.
And that means that God would agree. Go ahead.
No, so you're saying that by God telling them, yo, you can eat from any fruit, but you can't eat from that tree, that's not enough of a deterrent?
Well, obviously not. Trivially not, because it wasn't enough to prevent the undesirable outcome that he
whose decision was that?
It was God's decision to let it happen, right?
It was God's decision to let it happen, but who?
I'm fine with saying it was her decision, right? Look, I'm fine with saying it's her decision, but the point is that God doesn't want her to make that decision. Is it within his power to make it such that he can preserve her free will and make her and either cause her, make her, influence her, whatever word you want, to actually choose something good? And I don't see a contradiction in that.
Again, when we're talking about that Adam and Eve moment, God wanted Eve to choose him for him. And again, when we come to any relationship or any situation, you say that God could have influenced them. God gave them the Garden of Eden, Danny. He gave them every fruit. He told them they don't gotta work. He told them he gave them the power to go and name all the animals. He gave them everything they would have wanted.
The conditions that God created for Adam and Eve, were they enough to get God's desired outcome? Yes or no?
Again.
Yes or no? It's a yes or no question.
Say your question again.
The conditions that God gave Adam and Eve, were they enough to get them to choose the good? Yes or no?
Yes, 100%.
No, trivially not.
No, I mean, again, Danny, what didn't God provide for them in the Garden of Eden?
Whatever variables that would have made them to choose the good. I don't have to know those.
If I give my child everything they would have wanted, everything they could have dreamed of, and I ask them to do one little thing, and they choose not to do that one little thing, that is them electing to do something regardless of everything I've done for them. My argument here is that God did everything he could have by deciding to give them the Garden of Eden. You're downplaying the Garden of Eden. You're saying the Garden of Eden wasn't enough. Like, there was they didn't.
You know what I mean by that? By the Garden of, I'm saying that the Garden of Eden, the way he set it up, wasn't enough to get them to choose the good, because the fact that they did. No, look. Okay, maybe it's the confusion of language here, because I'm using it maybe in a different way. I'm saying that the conditions were not such that brought about the Adam and Eve choosing the good. The conditions were not the sort of conditions that brought about the good, right? He set the wrong conditions for bringing about the good, right?
So Danny, my argument is that if one were to look at the Garden of Eden and look at everything that God made, and then they were given free reign from everything. And if we're saying that wasn't enough for that person to choose,
look, you misunderstood me there. But you have to understand what I meant by enough, right? I just mean this: that the conditions did not bring about the outcome that he wanted, which means that the conditions were not right for the outcome that he wanted, right? Because if they were right for the outcome that he wanted, then the desirable outcome would have happened. That's all I mean by enough for.
Danny, I really do believe that regardless of what God had told or showed Eve, she would have actually fallen. And the reason why I say this is because we see time and time again in the Bible where God interjects and tell people about what they're going to do and not to do it. And he blesses people with different things time and time again. And every single time they reject him. So Eve rejecting God was going to happen. We can't again. You're saying that because she failed, God didn't do enough. I would argue that God did more than enough. And
No,
Eve
no,
still
you're
chose.
misunderstanding me. Look, maybe
Danny and Rise, may I interject? This has nothing to do with your discussion. Guys in the chat, please, I think I've said this in the beginning, in the middle, and I said it multiple times. I will leave it open so you guys can join this video chat and either question Danny or either question me or either question Rise. But please be patient. Once we get towards the end of the debate, Danny has agreed to speak with the audience. So please be patient. Thank you. Continue.
In terms of our conversation, Rise, this is the last thing I'll say, and I'll give you the last word. Okay, this is the last thing I'm gonna say to explain what I'm trying to say. I guess this is the way I see it. God sees all the possibilities before creation. He sees that there's a set of conditions that bring about a case where Adam and Eve do not sin. He also sees a different set of conditions in which made it such that, or allowed it such that, Adam and Eve did sin against him, right? And I'm saying that if God is all good, if he's all powerful and he's all knowing, he's going to choose the former, which is the possibility. He's going to make the possibility in which you have those conditions that brought about a sinless existence. He's going to actualize that possibility, not the other possibility. I'll rest my case there. You can have the last word.
And my argument is, Danny,
I do have a couple of questions, Danny. Continue,
sure.
My argument is that if we're going to say that God didn't choose to do everything to help Eve, then we're A, downplaying the Garden of Eden, and B, what we're saying is that we're trying to make God to be this doctor, what is it? Doctor, whatever. Is it Stone?
Strange?
No, Doctor Strange. Dr. Stone's an anime. To be this Doctor Strange type figure, where he looks at all the different 4 million combinations, right? And he only sees one possible way for this to work out. I believe that God decided that this is what he was going to do. And this is what he was going to give them everything. And if we're going to say that they needed an even harder choice, then the fact that there is one tree out of the billions of trees in the Garden of Eden, and the billions of fish and the billions of other things that they could have done in the Garden of Eden.
Right. Do you know that? Do you know the scholars say that the same tree was probably still around? Continue.
I've heard that. But we're saying that that was too difficult of a choice for them to make, or that was too much for them to handle. I believe that because we're humans and because we will always make that decision, and that's what Eve did. She made that decision. God gave her the opportunity. I think God gave her more than a fair choice. He gave her more than enough. If we go back to the first 3 books, the first 3 chapters before the fall, we'll see that everything that God made, the Bible said that he made it good. And we see also that Adam and Eve did not have to work. Adam and Eve were given the ability to name were given power or superiority over all the animals. Adam and Eve were given free reign to do what they want, except for one thing, and they proved that even that was not enough for them. So that's what I believe in. I think that we can move on to the next question or the next topic I have.
Okay, thanks for that.
We only have so many hours in the day, and we have. Danny, would you be open to having another discussion some other time on another topic of your?
Absolutely, anything.
No, reason being, maybe you can ask a second question, but realistically speaking, if we want some of the audience to participate, and I'm from what it looks like in the chat, the audiences don't really like you, Danny. So,
that's fine. I'm used to it.
So I told them to be nice. I tried. Danny. I tried.
Actually, I get a lot more hate from atheist servers because I'm not a naturalist. I think physicalism is kind of stupid, but so I get a lot of hate from the atheists. So I get hate from both both perspectives. So
Danny, I had a friend of
Danny,
mine.
I don't hate you.
well, I'm using the word hate loosely. I'm not. I know you don't. I don't.
Danny,
They actually
somebody sent a personal friend of mine sent me a message and told me to ask you this question. So, because he's a good friend of mine, one of my best friends. I only have 3 best friends. I'm not gonna say their names, but anyways, because then I'll get hate in my way, But anyways, ask Danny if you ever. Okay, this is worded very poorly for such a smart man. All right, ask Danny if you ever come to a point where God and Christianity. Oh, actually, it was worded correctly. All right. If you ever come to a point where God and Christianity is true, would you bow down and live for Jesus? That's what my friend asked.
I would hope so. I mean, I've been through that struggle before. In terms of, I found it very difficult to be a Christian. I think being a Christian is not easy. And not just because of like a bunch of principles and rules. I know that y'all don't see Christianity in terms of just like a set of commandments and rules. But there is like a sense of guilt that I got every time I just felt like I was inconsistent with my love for God every time I sinned. It wasn't because, I have to listen to these rules. And that feels really bad. And it's hard to
what's interesting, Danny, like we all been there before. And the Bible says that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ. So, whatever you were feeling, you know what I'm saying? That wasn't from God, because we all miss the mark. We all make mistakes. We all fall short of the glory of God. And we can't allow those feelings of guilt because we missed the mark to define who we are in Christ. Because
I would even say, sorry for cutting you off, Super Mario JP, is that, Danny, I prayed for you before I even met you. And that's just because at the end of the day, not just that I was called for you, I was called to do that. It's because I legitimately care for you, even though I don't even know you at all. Like for me personally, my belief and my faith and my prayer, and I'll continue this prayer, so you'll know that you have somebody praying for you in New York City, is that you come to Christ. And the reason why I said my prayers for you to come to Christ is because you're a very, very, very smart man, and you are you are a dude that see things from a perspective that you're very open-minded, and you are open to different thought processes and mentalities. And I think that you would make it, and I believe that you're searching, and I believe that you haven't officially gotten the answers that you wanted. I think that that's part of the reason why you come on this live. I think that you want to hear about the truth, and I pray that even if it's not this specific live stream, or maybe it's something down the road that down the line, that you do come to Christ, that you do recognize, as JP is saying, that there's no condemnation in Him, that those feelings that you were feeling are just lies of the enemy telling you that you have to be this specific way, that there's not and the fact that this is a relationship that you have with Christ, and these answers that you're seeking, I believe that you can ask these questions without labeling yourself an atheist.
Yeah, and just I saw in the chat it's a yes or no question. I'm just saying that I changed a lot as a person in the last 10 years, so I can't imagine what's going to happen in the next 10 years. It might be the case that if I believe Christianity to be true, that I might be inconsistent with it and not follow Jesus. It might be the case that it's hard for me to know. At this present moment, I would make an effort to, but that's all I can say.